You're listening to the Valley Current.
So, if you want to understand how a multi-billion-dollar artificial intelligence startup survives a catastrophic market crash, well, the absolute worst place to look is a climate-controlled boardroom in Silicon Valley.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The answer just isn't written in some pristine pitch deck or, hidden in a predictive algorithm.
It's really not. Because the actual blueprint for surviving economic chaos is, wildly enough, found in the bone density of a 3,000-kilogram hippopotamus.
I mean, it is the ultimate paradigm shift. We have this collective illusion that business innovation is this highly engineered, incredibly modern process, right? Like it happens under fluorescent light.
Yeah, but the reality of market survival is entirely primal. Okay, let's unpack this. Because today's deep dive is going to fundamentally change how you view your own career, how you look at business competition, and honestly, how you evaluate risk on a daily basis.
We are completely leaving the traditional business frameworks behind today. And our guide for this journey is a phenomenal document written by a man named Jack Russo.
Right, and he's not a biologist, which is the crazy part. He is a 71-year-old Silicon Valley attorney, a doctoral student, and the co-founder of a venture capital incubator.
Exactly. He has spent his entire life deeply embedded in the most cutthroat technological ecosystem on the planet. And what's really fascinating here is the context of how this document actually came to be.
Yeah, tell us about the trip.
So in early 2026, Russo travels to South Africa. And he is ostensibly there for, high-level seminars, discussions on artificial general intelligence, biomimicry, global tech policy.
All the standard buzzwords you would totally expect at a tech retreat.
Right, exactly. But while he is there, he actually steps out of the seminar rooms and goes into the wild.
Yeah.
And the resulting self-reflection, he writes, isn't some dry, peer-reviewed academic paper filled with impenetrable jargon.
No, it's a letter. It is this brilliant, urgent synthesis titled From the Karoo to Sand Hill Road.
And his notebooks from this trip, they aren't filled with AI theories. They are filled with incredibly detailed, almost obsessive observations about African ecosystems.
Like, he's literally out there looking at dirt, at lions, at extreme weather patterns.
Because he realized something profound while standing in the dirt. He realized that nature solved the exact problems of Sand Hill Road, the venture capital of the world, millions of years ago.
Because survival in nature operates under conditions of genuine scarcity, right? And absolute fatal consequences. You don't get a bailout.
Exactly, no bailouts. Russo takes the messy, ruthless, and incredibly effective logic of biological survival and overlays it directly onto early-stage venture capital.
So by the end of our conversation today, you, the listener, are going to have an entirely new vocabulary for navigating the chaotic dynamics of whatever market you operate in.
But before we get to the apex predators, right? Before we talk about the lions and the rhinos and how they map to aggressive business tactics, we have to look at the ground they're standing on.
Right, because you can't understand the strategy without understanding the board the game is played on.
You cannot separate the organism from its constraints. So the physical setting where Russo had this massive realization is incredibly specific. He was staying at the Aquila Private Game Reserve in the Western Cape of South Africa.
Which is this massive 10,000-hectare reserve founded in 1999, right?
Yes, by Cyril Derman. But what makes Aquila ecologically fascinating isn't just its massive size, it's the geography. It sits precisely at the collision point of three entirely distinct biomes.
So it's not just a generic jungle or, a flat savanna. It's three completely different worlds just crashing into each other.
Exactly. You have the mountain fimbos, the succulent Karoo, and the Renosterveld. And each of these biomes operates on completely different ruthless logic, which is dictated by extreme constraint.
Let's start with the mountain fynbos, because ecologically, this is the world's richest small flora kingdom, isn't it?
It really is. Less than 0.5% of the African continent's landmass somehow holds 20% of its plant species. We are talking about 9,000 distinct plant species packed into this area.
Wait, 9,000 just in that one small biome?
Yeah, and over 6,000 of them are endemic, meaning they exist entirely on that specific patch of dirt and nowhere else in the universe.
Now, if I hear 9,000 plant species, my immediate assumption is that the soil there must be like a botanical paradise. It must be rich, dark, and perfectly balanced, just like a greenhouse.
That is the great paradox, and honestly, it's the foundation of Russo's entire thesis. The secret to that unbelievable explosion of life is actually terrible soil.
It's just bad dirt.
The worst. The mountain Fynbos is built on quartzite sandstone. It is so notoriously nutrient poor, so violently acidic and devoid of basic sustenance that a generalist plant, a plant that needs a little bit of everything to survive, simply starves to death immediately.
So how does anything actually grow in that?
Scarcity forces extreme specialization. Because the environment offers almost nothing, countless micro niches are forced open.
Like they have to figure out a specific trick just to live.
Right. A plant can't just throw down roots and drink. It has to figure out a highly specific, microscopic, incredibly narrow biological mechanism to extract one specific trace mineral from a rock. The constraint is the actual architect of the diversity.
And then right next door to that, you have the succulent Karoo, which, just based on the name, sounds like a contradiction. A succulent desert.
It is an arid biodiversity hotspot. The succulent Karoo is a punishing desert environment, but it is absolutely teeming with life. And the evolutionary strategy here shifts away from just extracting minerals from bad soil to mastering the architecture of time and storage.
Storage is the key word there.
Yeah, these plants survive by developing fat, swollen leaves that hoard water. Some of them physically bury their entire bodies underground to escape the baking sun, leaving only this tiny translucent window at the surface for photosynthesis.
That is wild. They disguise themselves to look exactly like the stones around them, right? Just to avoid being eaten by desperate herbivores.
Yes. They lock their seeds in tight, resin-sealed capsules. And they just sit there in the dark, enduring. They endure years of absolute drought, quietly building up their internal capabilities in total invisible silence.
But then the moment the atmospheric pressure changes, the moment it actually rains, they don't just grow incrementally, do they?
No, they bloom explosively.
Yeah.
They cover the entire desert floor in color in a matter of hours, capturing every available resource before the sun bakes the earth dry again.
They don't try to force a bloom when the environment is hostile. And then the third biome, the Renosterveld, operates on an even stranger mechanism.
It really does. It's almost entirely gone now, unfortunately. Human agriculture has bulldozed it down to about 5% of its original size. It's the tragic biome of the three.
But what defines the remaining fragments of the Renosterveld is that the entire ecosystem is actually addicted to disruption.
Exactly. It doesn't just survive natural disasters. Its life cycle is entirely dependent on specific violent cycles of disruption that humans usually try to prevent.
Okay, so if I'm sitting at my desk right now trying to build a business or launch a project, what does terrible soil, hiding under a rock, and relying on disruption have to do with me?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Jack looks at these three biomes, and he doesn't see a nature documentary. He sees the historical origins of Silicon Valley.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture of venture capital and business building, the overarching thesis is clear, and it's highly contrarian.
Right. The thesis is that the absolute best investment ecosystems, the ones that produce world-altering, category-defining companies, are rarely the ones born into abundant resources.
Think about the origins of Silicon Valley in the mid-20th century. It was literally just fruit orchards.
Yes, agricultural land with terrible economic soil, essentially. There were no massive natural resources to mine, like oil in Texas or coal in Pennsylvania.
There was no entrenched political capital like in Washington, D.C. either.
Exactly, and no deep generational banking wealth like in New York or London. Silicon Valley had a severe scarcity of absolutely everything, except constraints and ideas.
And because capital was so scarce and resources were so thin, the culture naturally rewarded extreme specialization, just like the mountain Fynbos.
That's the parallel. When you don't have enough money to build a massive, sprawling conglomerate, you are forced to build a highly specialized tool that does one extremely narrow thing perfectly.
Genuine innovation requires constraint. Because when macroeconomic money is cheap and abundant, like we saw in the mid-2010s, you just get a flood of generalist companies making incremental, boring, low-stakes improvements.
You get 10 different apps that deliver food slightly differently. But when the soil is poor, when the venture capital markets freeze, that is when you get brilliant, weird, highly specialized companies that define entirely new categories of human behavior.
I have to admit, I love this framing because it goes against every instinct we have in modern business. We treat startups today exactly like houseplants. We really do.
Oh, totally. We assume that if a founder has a good idea, all we need to do is pour more water on them. We give them a massive $50 million Series A funding round.
Let's actually clarify that term for anyone outside the Silicon Valley bubble. A Series A is typically a startup's first significant round of venture capital financing.
Right. It's the money meant to take them from a proven idea to an actual scaling business. And the burn rate is simply how fast they're spending that cash every month to stay alive.
Right. So we give them this massive Series A, we dump the fertilizer of endless marketing budgets on them, and we expect them to instantly grow into a towering oak tree.
But Russo's document says the ultimate innovators are not grown in a climate-controlled greenhouse. They are forged in the desert.
So the succulent Karoo is really the perfect metaphor for startup longevity. Think about the companies that actually survived the brutal market turbulence of the last 2 decades.
It is rarely the company that raised the most cash at the highest, most ridiculous valuation right out of the gate. The true survivors are the succulent Karoo companies.
How do they operate differently in practical terms?
They use the dry years,
Yeah.
the deep economic recessions, the bear markets where nobody is spending money to quietly and obsessively build their capabilities. They hide underground like stones.
They keep their burn rate incredibly low.
Exactly. They don't hire 300 salespeople when they don't even have a perfect product yet. They refine the engineering. They store their resources.
And then when macroeconomic conditions finally shift, when interest rates drop and client budgets open up, they are the ones ready to bloom explosively.
They capture the entire market, while the so-called houseplant startups have already withered and died because they ran out of artificial fertilizer.
Okay, so the environment is defined by severe constraint. But you can't just be a plant if you want to be an apex predator. Eventually, you have to move. You have to secure resources actively.
Which brings us out of the soil and into the first of our major survival profiles, the lion.
The cultural myth of the lion is deeply ingrained in us, isn't it? We picture the lone wolf entrepreneur, the solitary king of the jungle standing on a rock, roaring, dominating the landscape purely through individual brilliance and brute strength.
But Russo observes the Barbary lions at Aquila, and the biological reality completely shatters that romantic business myth. They do not survive alone. They hunt in a highly structured pride.
And it's not just a chaotic mob of lions blindly charging at an antelope, hoping for the best.
Not at all. It is mathematically precise. Russo cites a landmark study by wildlife biologist Philip Stander conducted in the Etosha National Park.
Stander spent years painstakingly tracking and documenting 486 cooperative lion hunts.
And what he discovered fundamentally changes how we should view team dynamics. He found that individual lionesses do not just randomly attack. They assume the exact same specialized role, hunt after hunt after hunt.
Break those roles down for us because the VC translation here is perfect.
So you have 2 primary roles. First are the wing lions. Their specific job is to flank the prey. They fan out wide into the brush, intentionally revealing themselves at specific moments to drive the herd of prey inward toward a central point.
They are the agitators, basically, the flushers.
Yes. And then hidden in the tall grass, you have the center lions. The center lions do not run, they barely move. They wait in total disciplined ambush for the wing lions to deliver the chaotic prey directly into their strike zone.
The data on the success of this is wild. When they use this cooperative, highly specialized team strategy, their kill success rate hovers between 27 and 30%.
Which, in the wild, is an excellent batting average.
But what happens when a lion gets arrogant and tries a solo hunt? The success rate plummets to 2.3%. 2.3.
Which is statistical failure.
Yeah.
You will starve to death on a 2.3% success rate. And this is the exact literal lesson for early-stage venture capital firms, or really any executive team.
The best VC firms are not just a collection of 5 brilliant generalists who all have the exact same MBA, the exact same skill set, all sitting in a room trying to do the exact same thing.
Right. A great firm is a pride.
So what does a VC pride actually look like in practice?
Well, in a top-tier venture firm, you have wing lions and center lions. One partner might be the ultimate wing lion for deal sourcing. They spend their life at conferences. They have a massive network of former founders. They are constantly out in the field driving opportunities and intelligence inward toward the firm.
But another partner, however, might be incredibly introverted, but they are a genius at deep analytical technical diligence.
They are the center lion. They take the deal the wing lion brought in, tear apart the founder's code base, and execute the actual strike.
And maybe a third partner has the operational scars to sit on a company board and stop a first-time CEO from making a catastrophic hiring mistake. And a fourth specializes entirely in navigating complex FDA regulations for biotech investments.
Precisely. And the true stress test of this pride dynamic isn't during a bull market when every investment goes up and everyone looks like a genius.
The stress test is when the market freezes.
Exactly. When deal flow dries up and suddenly every single VC firm on Sand Hill Road is desperately chasing the exact same 3 viable AI companies.
That's when the solo hunters starve.
They do. Lions actually cooperate more, not less, when the environment becomes scarce. But in the venture world, a scarce environment often destroys firms. Why? Because of the carry.
Let's explain carry. It's the venture capitalist's share of the profits from a successful investment. It is the path to generational wealth.
Right. So if you have a firm where every partner is secretly competing against each other to get the credit for finding the next unicorn, just so they can justify a larger slice of the carry, that firm will fracture.
This brings up a psychological component that I found fascinating in Russo's notes. It's about role acceptance. In The Lion Pride, the wing lion doesn't sit in the grass bitterly coveting the center lion's glory.
The wing lion doesn't say, hey, I just ran 3 miles through the dust to drive that gazelle to you. Why do you get to make the kill and eat first? She just knows her job.
Ego death is biologically required for the pride to eat.
It is. The best business partnerships, whether in venture capital, a law firm, or a creative agency, are the ones where each partner genuinely owns their piece of the puzzle. The deal sourcer does not need to pretend to be a technical genius.
They do not need to take credit for someone else's strike just to feel secure in their own value. Okay, so the lion teaches us that cooperative specialization is how you secure resources when times are tough. But let's push back on that a bit. You don't always have a pride.
That's true.
What if you're a solo founder? What if you're a small emerging fund managing a tiny pool of capital? You can't hunt like a lion. You don't have the numbers.
That is exactly where Russo introduces the second predator, which plays a completely different, almost solitary game, the Cape leopard.
The leopard is a marvel, right? Because they thrive in conditions that would outright kill a lion.
Oh, absolutely. You find them deep in the baking desert of the Karoo, you find them in dense, suffocating rainforests, and you even find them hunting right on the edges of human suburbia. They are the ultimate adaptable organism.
But their hunting strategy is what makes them unique, and it is entirely based on extreme, almost agonizing patience.
A leopard is primarily nocturnal and highly elusive. A lion might start its charge from 50 meters away. A leopard will stalk its prey through the brush, completely silent, to within 3 to 6 meters before finally striking.
3 to 6 meters. If you are listening to this, imagine trying to sneak up on a wild animal until it is closer to you than your living room television.
The physical discipline required to wait that long, to hold your nerve without blowing your cover, is unbelievable. But the strike is only the beginning.
Right, because a leopard is relatively small and light compared to a lion or a hyena. It cannot defend its kill on the ground.
If it leaves a dead antelope in the grass, a pack of hyenas will overwhelm it in 10 minutes and steal the meal. So the leopard uses a strategy called arboreal caching.
It drags the kill up a tree.
Yes, but think about the physics of that. A 70-kilogram leopard will clamp its jaws onto a carcass that weighs up to twice its own body weight, and it will physically drag that dead weight straight up the vertical trunk of an acacia tree, caching it high in the branches.
Up there, in the vault of the canopy, it can feed at its leisure over several days, totally safe from the scavengers pacing on the ground below.
It sounds like the perfect system. You stalk carefully, you strike with precision, and then you hide your treasure in a vault in the sky.
It sounds foolproof, but Russo points out the biological catch, and the catch is absolutely brutal.
Studies show that 2 out of every 3 kills that a leopard goes through the agonizing effort of dragging up a tree are eventually stolen anyway.
Wait, 66% of their stored capital is eroded? Either a larger male leopard climbs up and takes it, or vultures pick it clean, or the carcass simply rots and falls out of the tree.
Exactly.
I'm stuck on this leopard analogy. If 66% of their kills are stolen in the tree, isn't that just a terrible strategy? Why not eat as much as you can on the ground and run? How does this translate to venture capital without making the investor look completely foolish?
So what does this all mean? It translates perfectly to the concept of patient capital, which is a massive buzzword in finance, but one that is fundamentally misunderstood.
Everyone thinks patient capital means passive capital.
But the leopard is not passive. It isn't just sitting in a tree waiting for a gazelle to trip and fall into its mouth. It is actively stalking, reading the terrain, positioning itself, and waiting for the exact mathematical moment when the risk-reward ratio is irresistible.
So what is the tree in the VC world?
The tree is the venture fund structure itself. When LPs give money to a venture capitalist, it is typically locked up in a 10-year fund structure. The VC uses that tree to protect the capital from immediate liquidation pressure.
By locking the money up, they keep the startup above the daily noise, panic, and quarterly earnings pressure of the public stock markets.
In theory, you can feed on that investment thesis at your leisure as the startup grows over a decade.
But the theft rate, that 66% loss rate, is the harsh reality. It's like finding a treasure chest, painstakingly putting it inside a massive steel vault, locking the door, and then realizing the lock on the vault is made of ice and is slowly melting.
That is exactly the friction Russo is highlighting. The theft rate proves that every single investment thesis, no matter how brilliant, has a competitive half-life.
Give me an example of that half-life in the tech world.
Think about an investor who finds a brilliant startup building a novel software tool, maybe the first really good team collaboration chat app before Slack existed. The investor funds it, locks it in their portfolio tree, and assumes they have a 10-year runway to dominate the market.
They pat themselves on the back for being patient.
But while they are resting, Microsoft realizes chat is the future, builds Microsoft Teams, bundles it for free with Office 365, and instantly steals the entire market share.
They climbed the tree and stole the carcass.
Exactly. Larger predators with better distribution or faster-moving startup competitors are always climbing your tree.
Yeah.
You have to actively guard your portfolio, you have to help your founders hire executives, pivot their product, and aggressively acquire market share.
You cannot just park your money, call yourself a patient investor, and go to sleep.
Yeah.
Okay, so hunting and hoarding the lion and the leopard, those are strategies for immediate day-to-day survival, securing the next meal, closing the next deal.
Right.
But what happens when the ecosystem throws an existential threat at you?
Yeah.
A multi-year drought, a massive global economic recession. Securing a meal today doesn't matter if the river completely dries up tomorrow.
Navigating those long-term landscape-level threats requires entirely different tools. This is where Russo's framework transitions away from the predators and moves to the heavyweights.
Right.
And the first is the elephant.
The elephants at Aquila are actually deeply fascinating because they are rescues, right?
Yes, they were saved from culling and poaching operations across Africa. Because of that, they carry incredible psychological trauma. But with that deep trauma comes deep embodied wisdom.
And the social structure of the elephant herd completely goes against our cartoonish pop culture ideas of the animal kingdom being ruled by brute male strength.
It relies on a completely different metric for leadership. Elephant herds are not led by the biggest, strongest, most aggressive male. They are led by the oldest female, the matriarch.
Russo highlights this incredible piece of research by a scientist named Karen McComb in the Amboseli National Park in Kenya. And the data from this study just stops you in your tracks.
McComb was studying how elephant families make decisions under severe environmental threat. During a catastrophic drought year, the ecosystem collapsed. The infant mortality rate across the general elephant population spiked from a normal 2% all the way to 20%.
It was an absolute massacre.
But not all the herds suffered equally. The herds that were led by older matriarchs specifically, females who were old enough to have personally lived through the last catastrophic drought, which happened decades earlier, those herds survived with minimal casualties.
Why? Because the matriarch carried a literal mental map to distant, permanent water sources in her head.
Exactly. When the usual rivers dried up, the younger elephants panicked. But the matriarch simply turned and led them 50 miles across the desert to a spring she hadn't visited in 30 years.
The herds led by younger females, who lacked that living institutional memory, wandered aimlessly and perished. That is profound. The memory isn't just nostalgia, it's literally a map to water.
And in the venture capital translation, Russo argues that the founding general partner's historical memory is the firm's most vital and most underappreciated asset.
Without question. Think about a general partner who was sitting in the decision-making chair in March of 2000 when the dot-com bubble spectacularly collapsed. They remembered the absolute terror of companies going to zero overnight.
Or the partner who is still standing in September 2008 when Lehman Brothers collapsed and the entire global financial system froze. They literally couldn't get credit lines to make payroll for their startups.
And then you add the bizarre liquidity crises of the early COVID days.
Right. A partner who has navigated those three distinct apocalyptic events possesses a kind of pattern recognition and survival instinct that no artificial intelligence data room, no predictive financial algorithm, and certainly no freshly minted 25-year-old MBA graduate can provide.
They know what the sky looks like right before the tornado touches down.
And Russo makes a chilling point here about what happens to a firm over time. He calls it the invisible knowledge loss. Let's say a veteran partner retires, or they get pushed out by an aggressive younger faction in the firm, or very commonly they just get incredibly rich, buy the vineyard, and stop paying close attention to the daily grind.
When that matriarch is lost, the herd loses its navigational capacity. But the terrifying part is that nobody notices.
Because it's invisible during peacetime. The second-generation partners, who have only ever invested during the massive 10-year bull market of the 2010s, when money was basically free, interest rates were zero, and every SaaS startup valuation went up automatically. They literally do not know what they do not know.
Everything feels fine. The firm looks incredibly healthy. They are high-fiving in the boardroom.
Right up until the day the macroeconomic drought arrives. The credit markets freeze, valuations halve overnight, and suddenly the young partners look around and realize they don't know where the water is. They don't know how to triage a failing portfolio because they've never had to do it.
Let's talk about how these elephants actually communicate this wisdom, because the biological mechanism blew my mind. Infrasound.
It is an evolutionary masterpiece. Elephants communicate complex social and navigational data using vocal frequencies that are entirely below the threshold of human hearing. We literally cannot hear them talking.
This infrasound is so powerful, it can travel up to 10 kilometers across the open savanna. And they don't just hear it with their ears, right? They detect the low-frequency vibrations rolling through the earth using sensitive nerve endings in the pads of their feet.
But the truly amazing part is the atmospheric physics of it. Do you know when they use it the most?
At dusk and dawn. Because as the sun sets or rises, the temperature of the air near the ground changes relative to the air higher up, creating what is called a temperature inversion layer in the atmosphere.
Yes. This inversion acts like an acoustic ceiling, trapping the infrasound and bouncing it back down to the ground instead of letting it escape into the sky. During these specific twilight hours, the listening radius of the elephant herd expands tenfold.
The matriarch's most important, strategic communications coordinating with other herds, warning of predators, happen when the signals can travel the farthest under the cover of twilight.
If you're listening to this and you lead a team, think about how you communicate. Are you just sending out formal daytime emails that nobody reads? Because the VC equivalent of infrasound, according to Russo, is informal intelligence.
We have this idea that the real work of business happens in the official pitch meeting, with the founder standing in front of a PowerPoint, clicking through revenue projections.
But Russo says the actual due diligence, the real intelligence gathering that decides a startup's fate, happens at a completely different frequency. It happens in the infrasound of Silicon Valley. It's the whisper network.
It's the intelligence gathered at a 9 p.m. dinner at the Rosewood Hotel. It's the quick, unrecorded conversation in the hallway between sessions at a tech conference.
The veteran GP, who has spent 30 years building deep, trusting, informal relationships, operates with that expanded dusk and dawn radius.
Give me an example of how that infrasound changes an investment decision.
A young partner looks at a founder's spreadsheet during a 10 a.m. meeting and says, "The metrics look great. Let's invest $10 million. The veteran matriarch partner nods, but then at 9 p.m., she picks up her phone and calls a former co-founder who used to work with that CEO.
She asks one question: give me the truth. What happens when this guy is under pressure?
And the voice on the other end of the line says, he blames his team and hides in his office. That is the infrasound. The signals that matter most in venture capital, the signals about character, resilience, and hidden liabilities, travel exclusively through informal channels when people have let their formal daytime guard down.
So the elephant provides the wisdom and the informal intelligence. But how does a firm actually make a decision? Because a massive venture fund isn't just a dictatorship where one general partner points a finger and everyone obeys.
There are complex power dynamics. And this brings us to the Cape buffalo, which to me is the most surprising animal on this entire list.
When you look at a massive herd of Cape buffalo moving across the plains, it looks chaotic, aggressive, and entirely primal. It just looks like a wall of muscle and horns.
But a renowned ecologist named Herbert Prinz spent years documenting their behavior in the 1990s, and what he discovered completely upended our understanding of herd dynamics. The buffalo are highly democratic.
A democratic buffalo herd. It sounds like an oxymoron.
Literally. Friends observe what happens when a resting herd of hundreds of buffalo needs to decide which direction to travel next to find fresh grazing or water. They don't just follow an alpha male. They hold a vote.
How does a buffalo vote? Do they bellow or stamp their feet?
No, it's silent. The mature females will physically stand up, stretch, and then stand perfectly still, gazing intently in their preferred direction of travel. Then, after a few minutes, they sit back down.
They just look in a direction.
Yeah, they do this repeatedly over the course of an afternoon. It is an entirely visual, non-vocal voting process. They were tallying the vectors. And eventually, as the afternoon wears on, the herd slowly stands up and moves in the exact direction indicated by the statistical majority of the gazing females.
Every single adult female's preference counts equally. But what if the vote is split 50-50 and they can't agree?
The herd will actually temporarily fracture. The factions will peacefully separate, go to different water holes for the night, and then reconvene the next day. There is no violent dominance hierarchy determining the daily movement.
But there is an ultimate constraint. The buffalo are massive animals, and they have to drink water every single day. Distance to water is the non-negotiable metric that governs every single vote they take. They cannot wander endlessly like a camel.
And this is where Russo's VC translation hits the hardest. In the venture ecosystem, the VC firm, the general partners making the investments, might think they are the masters of the universe, but they are not. The Cape Buffalo herd represents the limited partners, the LPs.
Let's quickly define the difference for the listener, because it's crucial to understanding who actually holds the power in finance.
Absolutely. The general partner, the GP, is the venture capitalists you read about in the news. They are the ones picking the startups and sitting on the boards. But the limited partners, the LPs, are the entities that actually supply the billions of dollars the GPs are investing.
The LPs are university endowments, massive state pension funds, philanthropic foundations, and family offices. They hold the purse strings.
So VCs act like gods, but they are entirely beholden to the democratic vote of the LPs.
Exactly. And those experienced repeat LPs, the university endowment that has backed a specific VC fund across 5 different economic cycles, they are the mature female buffalo standing up and looking in a direction.
When an LP tells a GP, we are reducing our exposure to consumer crypto and looking for more hard-tech climate solutions, that is a buffalo standing up and pointing.
A GP who arrogantly ignores the quiet democratic signals of their LP base is eventually going to lead their firm to the wrong waterhole. And what happens?
The herd simply abandons them in the next fundraising cycle. The GP throws a massive launch party for their new fund, and no money shows up.
And Russo brings up side letters and MFN clauses here, which I think is a brilliant structural analogy for how the herd protects itself.
An MFN clause stands for Most Favored Nation. In venture capital, it's a legal agreement that ensures a smaller LP will automatically receive the same favorable fee terms or information rights that a massive, powerful LP manages to negotiate privately.
Russo likens this legal structure to the physical defensive behavior of the buffalo herd, because when a pride of lions approaches a buffalo herd, the buffalo don't scatter, do they?
They do the opposite. The massive, fully grown adults physically move to the outside perimeter, locking their horns together, creating an impenetrable wall of muscle and bone to protect the smaller, vulnerable calves clustered in the center.
The MFN clause is the financial equivalent of that defensive ring. It ensures that the smaller endowments aren't picked off or disadvantaged by the massive sovereign wealth funds throwing their weight around.
And what is the water? If distance to water dictates every move the buffalo make, what is the water that the VC herd absolutely must drink to survive?
Distributions.
Yeah.
Cash flow. This is the reality check of finance. As an LP, you aren't just a static, theoretical pool of money sitting in a vault. You have real-world obligations.
If you are the California State Pension Fund, you have to cut actual checks to retired teachers and firefighters every single month. If you are a university endowment, you have to fund real campus operations and scholarships.
That immediate need for liquidity is their thirst for water. So if a venture capitalist gets arrogant, falls in love with their portfolio, and refuses to sell their successful startups because they think the valuation might go slightly higher next year,
they are playing games with the distribution schedule. They are holding on to paper wealth while the LPs are dying of thirst.
A GP who fails to return actual cash capital when promised is literally threatening the herd's access to water. And as Russo dryly notes in his document, threatening the water of a Cape buffalo never ends well.
The herd will relentlessly trample you into the dust and move on to a GP who knows how to find a river.
Okay, so the herd provides safety and it provides the capital. But if you are an investor or an entrepreneur, you aren't paid to just be safe. Safety yields average returns.
If you want to generate massive, exponential, outsized returns, you cannot do what the consensus of the herd is doing. You have to find the outliers, the animals that operate completely outside the normal rules.
And Russo gives us two heavyweights that are almost entirely misunderstood by the market observers: the rhino and the hippo. Let's start with the rhino.
The rhino is a tragic, beautiful, and vital figure in this framework. Biologically, the black rhino is an intensely solitary creature. It does not run in democratic herds like the buffalo. It walks alone.
Its most famous biological attribute is, of course, its skin. The hide of a rhino can be up to 5 centimeters thick.
It is constructed from dense, cross-linked collagen layers that make it structurally stronger and more resistant to puncture than almost any other mammal's hide on Earth.
But evolution demands trade-off. You don't get armor like that for free. The trade-off is its eyesight, right?
Yes. The rhino has notoriously terrible, almost comically poor eyesight. It is essentially blind to the obvious broad strokes visual information happening at a distance. If you stand completely still 50 yards away, it likely cannot distinguish you from a tree stump.
But to compensate for that severe visual deficit, it has evolved an extraordinary, swiveling sense of hearing and a hyper-acute sense of smell.
Its olfactory bulb is massive. It compensates for missing the obvious visual cues by developing an extreme, almost supernatural sensitivity to the invisible signals that every other animal on the plains misses entirely.
And the population data Russo provides here is incredibly grim. The black rhino population crashed by an astonishing 98% between 1960 and 1992. They went from around 100,000 wild animals down to roughly 2,500. They were pushed to the absolute brink of extinction.
And Russo maps the black rhino directly to the true contrarian investor. Now, if you spend 5 minutes on LinkedIn or venture capital Twitter, every single investor describes themselves in their bio as a contrarian thinker.
It is the ultimate badge of honor in Silicon Valley to claim you think differently than the herd.
But Russo argues that almost none of them actually are, because true contrarians, exactly like the black rhino, are incredibly rare and constantly facing professional extinction.
Why? If being a contrarian is how you find the next trillion-dollar company, why does the industry actively punish them?
Because the institutional incentive structures of capital demand conformity. A real contrarian investor does not look like a genius in the moment. When they make an investment, from the outside, they look deeply confused, highly reckless, or just completely objectively wrong.
They are solitary thinkers. They aren't going to the flashy networking parties in San Francisco to gossip about what the herd is currently funding.
They are sitting alone, reading obscure, dense academic papers at the absolute fringes of unproven scientific disciplines. They are funding eccentric, difficult scientists who don't even know how to format a pitch deck yet.
And what about the rhino's bad eyesight? How does that biological deficit translate to an investor strategy?
The poor eyesight represents a conscious, necessary trade-off. The true contrarian investor isn't actually blind. They've simply traded away their consensus pattern recognition. They actively stop looking at the shiny, obvious, perfectly packaged software trends that everyone else sees perfectly clearly.
In exchange for ignoring the obvious, they develop an extreme olfactory sensitivity. They can smell the faint, invisible beginnings of a fundamental paradigm shift years before the buffalo herd can see it on a spreadsheet.
Give me a real-world example. What did a rhino look like 10 years ago?
Think about the investors who were putting massive amounts of capital into commercial space launch technology in 2008. At the time, the herd thought that was completely insane. Space was for NASA, not startups. It looked like a reckless waste of money.
The rhinos couldn't see the safe, obvious enterprise software plays right in front of them, but they could smell that the privatization of the cosmos was coming.
But the solitude has a cost. The rhino nearly went extinct because humans exploited its solitary nature to harvest its valuable horn. The contrarian investor nearly goes extinct because institutional LPs, the buffalo herd we just talked about, get extremely nervous when a GP wanders too far away into the brush.
If you are a GP and you invest in 10 crazy hardware companies while the rest of the market is making safe returns in software, and those hardware companies stumble, the LPs will fire you.
The system essentially demands that you look and speak like a contrarian for your marketing brochure, but act exactly like a safe, predictable buffalo when actually deploying the capital.
Earning that 5-centimeter thick skin is painful. You have to be willing to look like an idiot for 5 to 7 years before your thesis is proven right. Most people simply cannot withstand that level of professional ridicule.
Which brings us to my absolute favorite animal in the entire framework. If the rhino is the deeply misunderstood contrarian investor, the hippo is the entirely misunderstood founder. And the reason I love this is because hippos look ridiculous. They look like giant, slow, clumsy, peaceful herbivores, just wallowing in the mud, blowing bubbles.
Which is, without a doubt, the most fatal misconception a human being can make in Africa.
Yeah.
The hippopotamus is the deadliest large mammal on the continent, period. A 2024 ecological analysis showed that 87% of hippo attacks on humans result in a fatality.
87%.
That is a vastly higher kill rate than lions. It is higher than crocodiles. A full-grown male hippo can weigh up to 3,200 kilograms, and despite looking like a bloated blimp, it can sprint at 30 kilometers per hour on dry land. It will easily outrun most human beings.
Its jaws can snap a canoe in half. Its bite force is almost 3 times greater than that of a lion.
And here's the fact that I actually had to look up to believe. They don't even swim. When you see a hippo moving incredibly fast through a river, they're not paddling. Their bone structure is so incredibly dense, so heavy, that they immediately sink like a stone.
They're literally running along the bottom of the riverbed and bounding violently upward to take a breath.
It's terrifying, unstoppable physics. Their bone density serves the same biological function that a diver's weight belt serves. It anchors them against the massive currents of African rivers. But from a behavioral and business standpoint, Russo points out the hippo's most defining characteristic, its dual-domain existence.
A hippo essentially operates as 2 completely different, unrecognizable animals depending on the time of day. Daytime hippo versus nighttime hippo. Walk us through the difference.
During the day, they are mostly submerged in the water to protect their skin from the sun. In the river, they organize into these rigid, highly hierarchical pods of 10 to 40 animals. The pod is completely dominated by a single, incredibly aggressive alpha bull.
They are fiercely territorial. If you cross the invisible line in their pool, they will destroy you.
But after dark, when the sun goes down, that entire rigid social structure completely dissolves.
They just abandon the hierarchy.
Completely. The territory is forgotten. Every single animal leaves the water alone. The daytime pod fractures and they become solitary, silent, non-territorial grazers. A single hippo will walk up to 10 kilometers through the darkness, moving quietly through the brush, consuming almost 40 kilograms of grass before dawn, entirely alone, before returning to the river and resuming its daytime identity.
So how does Russo translate this terrifying dual-domain water tank? Who is the hippo?
The hippo represents the company, or specifically the founder, that does not look dangerous. It is the uncredentialed founder. The person who walks into a pristine Sand Hill Road office without the famous previous exit on their resume, without a Stanford computer science degree, wearing ill-fitting clothes, pitching a product that sounds incredibly obvious, unsexy, or even intensely boring.
They are the clumsy animal at the waterhole that the flashy venture capitalists completely ignore. Because the VCs are out looking for lions. They want the slick, charismatic predator who gives a TED Talk pitch.
Right. The VCs want the founder who looks like a founder. So they pass on the hippo. And then 18 months later, the macroeconomic market shifts. The flashy, charismatic Web3 company that raised $50 million collapses because they had no actual revenue.
And suddenly that boring founder who built a highly specific logistics routing software is running a billion-dollar monopoly, generating massive cash flow, utterly crushing the competition, and every VC is standing around saying, how on earth did we miss this?
The hippo teaches you to fundamentally stop assessing threat and opportunity based on aesthetic appearance. The most asymmetric, life-changing investment opportunity is almost always the one that looks too ordinary, too clumsy, or too boring to bother with.
And the dual-domain behavior is such a crucial, critical lesson for how investors conduct due diligence. Think about it. Investors only ever see the daytime hippo. They see the founder in the boardroom, in the highly controlled, air-conditioned environment, delivering a measured, strategic, perfectly rehearsed pitch deck.
But that tells you absolutely nothing about their actual capacity to survive. Nothing. To really know a founder, you have to know what they look like after dark. Who is this person at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday when the primary AWS database suddenly corrupts, the lead engineer abruptly quits to join a rival, and the entire remaining team is panicking on a Zoom call?
Are they still measured and strategic? Do they roll up their sleeves and fix the problem, or do they completely unravel, scream at their employees, and hide?
The investor who only accepts the daytime boardroom pitch has absolutely no idea how the hippo grazes at night. You have to make the informal reference calls. You have to use the elephant's infrasound to find out how they operate when the performative territorial display of the daytime river is turned off.
And we absolutely cannot talk about the hippo without talking about hyposudoric acid. Because to me, this is the ultimate defining business lesson of the entire source document. What exactly is this stuff?
For centuries, early European explorers thought hippos literally sweat blood. Because when a hippo is out of the water, it secretes this thick, viscous, reddish-pink fluid from its skin glands that coats its entire body. But it's not blood, and it's not actually sweat.
It is a highly complex, completely unique, self-generated chemical compound called hyposudoric acid, and it is a miracle of evolutionary engineering. It functions simultaneously as a highly potent, broad-spectrum antibiotic to stave off infections and as a heavy-duty UV sunscreen.
Which they desperately need because they spend their lives soaking in a bacteria-rich soup of a river under the blistering, unforgiving African sun. Any scratch would normally become deeply infected instantly.
Exactly, but the philosophical key here is that the hippo does not wait for favorable external conditions to stay healthy. It does not actively seek out shade when the sun gets hot. It does not rely on finding a clean, sterile pool of water. It literally manufactures its own biological armor from the inside out constantly.
This is such a brilliant analogy because you cannot administer antibiotics after the massive infection hits and expect to survive. If you translate hyposudoric acid to a company's balance sheet and culture, it perfectly represents internal resilience built during peacetime.
Yes. Think about the companies that survive brutal economic downturns. They are rarely the ones that just got lucky with market timing. They are the ones that spent the good times manufacturing their own armor.
How does a company secrete hyposudoric acid? What does that look like in practice?
It looks like building proprietary owned distribution channels instead of relying entirely on Facebook ads. It looks like fostering extreme, almost irrational customer loyalty by providing insane levels of service so that when a recession hits, your customers cut other budgets but keep paying you.
It means engineering a company culture of such deep mutual respect that your top engineers stay with you, even when their stock options are temporarily underwater. It means maintaining a lean, ruthless, highly disciplined cost structure that doesn't require an ongoing bull market just to make payroll.
If your startup constantly relies on external funding, if you have to raise a new round of venture capital every 12 months just to solve your internal crises, you will die the second the external market dries up. You have to secrete your own armor. You have to build the protective mechanisms before the bacteria of a recession ever arrive.
Peacetime preparation determines wartime survival. It's that simple.
Okay, this is brilliant. So we've covered the cooperative predators, the wisdom of the herd, and the hidden power of the heavyweights. But adapting to an environment or hiding within it like a hippo is one thing. What happens when an organism or a founder needs to operate at a scale that completely defies standard accepted biology?
Because every so often, a startup comes along that doesn't just want to be a better version of something else. They don't want to just dominate their local waterhold. They want to be massive. They want to tower over the entire ecosystem. And this brings us to the giraffe.
Which is an incredibly interesting addition by Russo, because historically, the giraffe was never considered part of the famous Big Five hunting trophies in Africa. It wasn't considered an aggressive danger to humans.
But Russo includes it here because it represents something entirely different from predatory tactics. It represents the absolute necessity of architectural redesign when striving for unprecedented scale.
We all know giraffes are tall. That's the cliche. They operate at 5.5 meters in the air. But until I read this document, I never actually stopped to think about the horrifying physical engineering required to keep an animal of that size alive.
From a biological standpoint, a giraffe is an engineering nightmare. To pump heavy, oxygenated blood all the way from the chest, straight up a vertical neck against the crushing force of gravity to reach the brain, a giraffe's cardiovascular system has to operate at a resting blood pressure of roughly 280 over 180 millimeters of mercury.
Just for context, if a human being had a blood pressure of 280 over 180, what would happen?
You would instantly die. Your heart would literally explode or your blood vessels would rupture, resulting in a massive fatal stroke. It is a fatally high pressure for almost any other mammal. But here is the crazy part. A giraffe's heart is not proportionally larger than a cow's heart. It is the exact same size relative to its body weight.
It didn't just grow a giant magical pump. The incredible output comes from structural, microscopic innovation. How did it redesign the pump?
The walls of the giraffe's left ventricle, the chamber responsible for the massive upward push, are radically thickened, almost hypermuscular. Their cardiac electrical rhythm is completely altered to allow for optimal filling between these violent contractions.
They literally have actual genetic mutations in 5 specific genes related to cardiac fibrosis. In a human, those mutations would cause heart failure by making the muscle stiff. In a giraffe, it allows the heart muscle to thicken immensely without losing its elasticity.
Okay, so the pump works, but what happens when they bend down to drink water? If you have blood pumping at 280 over 180 straight up to fight gravity, and then the giraffe suddenly drops its head 7 feet down to ground level to drink from a puddle, gravity is now working with that massive pressure.
It should instantly blow out every single blood vessel in the brain like a fire hose bursting.
And that is exactly where the ribcage bile comes in. It translates to wonderful net. It is a highly complex, sponge-like network of tiny elastic arteries located at the base of the skull. When the giraffe lowers its head to drink, this network automatically activates, pooling and aggressively restricting the blood flow, functioning as a pressure release valve to prevent a brain hemorrhage.
And the engineering doesn't stop there. When they stand back up, why doesn't all the blood immediately pool in their lower legs and hooves, causing them to pass out? Because the skin on their lower legs and neck is incredibly tight, non-elastic, and rigid, functioning exactly like heavy-duty biological compression stockings.
Every single system in the body, the heart, the veins, the skin, the brain, had to be entirely redesigned from scratch to support the height. It's not just a horse that decided to grow a long neck.
And that is the core, vital VC lesson. The giraffe represents the rare, paradigm-shifting infrastructure investment. Think about a massive foundational platform. When Amazon decided to build Amazon Web Services, AWS, they weren't just building a slightly better bookstore, they were building the infrastructure that would eventually host half the internet.
When a company today tries to build a completely new foundational artificial intelligence large language model from scratch, they're building a giraffe.
Yeah.
We're not talking about an incrementally faster database. We are talking about a company that, if it succeeds, permanently alters the fundamental conditions under which all other companies operate.
And the rule of the giraffe is you cannot build a half giraffe.
No, you absolutely cannot. And this is where most startups fail. If you take a standard business model, let's say a horse, and you just stretch the neck by dumping $100 million of marketing into it, hoping it will reach the high leaves, but you don't simultaneously mutate the heart and engineer the Rite Mirval and add the compression stockings.
The animal simply dies.
Exactly. The infrastructure collapses under its own blood pressure. Every single failure mode of operating at that massive, unprecedented scale must be anticipated and solved concurrently. The all-or-nothing nature of infrastructure investing is what makes these platform bets so terrifying for investors and so unbelievably lucrative when they actually work.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me regarding the giraffe. It's not just their physical bodies, it's their social structure. Russo calls it fission fusion dynamics. They don't have a rigid, permanent herd structure like the democratic buffalo.
They have highly fluid temporary social groups. A pod of giraffes will instantly assemble based on an immediate localized need, like defending a specific grove of trees from a predator, and then the moment the threat is gone, they completely dissolve. They scatter. There's no permanent alpha, no permanent hierarchy.
And if you look closely at how the most advanced, bleeding-edge AI-native startups are structuring themselves right now, it is exactly this fission fusion model. The traditional, rigid corporate org chart is dead in these companies. You don't have fixed departments operating in isolated silos for years at a time.
You don't have the VP of marketing who refuses to talk to the VP of engineering.
Right. Instead, you have dynamic, incredibly agile pods of talent that swarm around a highly specific engineering problem, solve it using massive AI leverage in 3 weeks, and then instantly disband to form new, completely different clusters around the next problem.
So for the listener evaluating a massive new project at work or deciding whether to invest in a highly ambitious startup, Russo says the critical question you have to ask is, are you actually redesigning the entire internal system to support this new scale? Or are you just stretching the neck of your existing legacy business model and blindly praying the heart catches up?
Most companies just stretch the neck.
Yeah.
And they hemorrhage. It's a brutal reality check. Okay, so we've looked at how to build an animal. We've looked at their individual strategies for securing resources, for scaling to massive heights, for surviving multi-year droughts. But ever so often, the game board itself is completely destroyed.
The environment doesn't just get difficult, it gets entirely obliterated. And according to this African ecosystem, that destruction isn't a tragedy. It is an absolute biological necessity. Let's talk about the Finbo's fire.
This takes us all the way back to the landscape itself, beneath all the animals we've discussed. The mountain Finbo's ecosystem that we talked about at the very beginning, the one with 9,000 endemic plant species, doesn't just miraculously tolerate wildfire. It fundamentally requires it to exist. Fire is not a threat to the Finbo's. Fire is the operating system.
Explain that, because usually fire is the end of the story. Without it, the ecosystem actually dies.
Literally. If a Finbo's landscape goes too long without a massive sweeping fire, the canopy of the older established plants permanently closes. They grow too thick. No sunlight can reach the ground. The millions of seeds buried in the soil slowly lose their viability and rot. Invasive species creep in from the edges and take over the nutrients.
And eventually, those 9,000 unique, specialized endemic species simply choke to death in the shade and disappear forever. For the ecosystem to live, it must occasionally burn completely to the ground to reset the board.
And the plants know this. They haven't just accepted it. They have evolved highly specific strategies to actively exploit the apocalypse. Russo breaks them down into 3 distinct categories of survival, starting with the resprouters.
The resprouters are the plants that have invested almost all of their evolutionary energy into underground architecture. They possess massive, thick, woody root structures called lignotubers, which are packed densely with stored starches and nutrients. When the raging fire sweeps through, everything above ground, the stems, the leaves, the beautiful flowers, is completely and violently incinerated. From the surface, it looks like a moonscape. It looks dead.
But beneath the insulating soil, the ligntuber is completely unharmed. And within 4 short months, fresh, vibrant new growth pushes up directly from those exact same roots, completely unimpeded by competition.
And in the VC world, who are the resprouters when a market fire hits?
The resprouters are the companies with incredibly deep, unsexy structural moats. We are talking about companies with highly defensible, patented intellectual property. We are talking about companies that own massive proprietary data sets that no competitor can easily scrape. Or companies with deeply entrenched multi-year B2B enterprise contracts that are legally painful to break.
So when a macroeconomic fire hits, like the massive, brutal market correction we saw between 2022 and 2024, where venture funding essentially froze overnight, interest rates spiked, and tech valuations collapsed by 80%, what happens to them?
The surface-level metrics of these companies absolutely burn away. Their public stock price might have. Their vanity marketing metrics disappear. They might have to execute layoffs. But because their foundational roots, those B2B contracts and that IP, are so deep and unassailable, they simply wait out the heat. And once the ash settles, they regrow rapidly and dominate because the fire just vaporized all of their less grounded, highly leveraged competitors.
Then you have the second strategy, which Russo calls the reseeders. And to me, these are the tragic heroes of the Finbo's.
The reseeders take a completely different evolutionary gamble. They invest absolutely no energy into root structure. Instead, they put all their energy into prolific seed production. They lock thousands of seeds inside incredibly tough, physically dense, fireproof cones. When the massive fire finally arrives, the parent plant is killed. It does not survive. It burns to ash.
But the intense heat of the fire causes those specialized cones to finally crack open. The seeds are ejected directly onto the freshly burned, incredibly nutrient-rich ash. And because the fire just eliminated the entire overhead canopy and all the competition for sunlight, those new seeds germinate and grow exponentially faster than they ever could have under the old, crowded system.
The parent plant violently dies so the next generation can dominate. The parallel here to Silicon Valley is so clear. The reseeders are the failed startups. The companies that had a brilliant visionary idea raised a ton of venture capital, but for whatever reason, bad timing, bad unit economics, poor management, they just could not survive the market correction. They go bankrupt. The parent company dies.
The ecosystem doesn't die.
Right. Because their talent, their heavily trained software engineers, the open source code they contributed to the community, the hard, painful operational lessons they learned, those are the seeds. They scatter into the ecosystem. And those exact same engineers go on to found the next generation of category-defining companies in the freshly cleared landscape.
It forces us to entirely reframe how we view economic downturns. What feels like an apocalypse, what feels like the tragic destruction of billions of dollars of paper wealth, is actually the vital, necessary clearing of the canopy to allow new light to reach the next generation of innovators. Without the fire, the market stagnates, monopolies become too powerful, and the entire system chokes on its own bloat.
I get the biological necessity of the fire, I really do, but let me push back on this because it feels incredibly callous. It's a bit cold to tell a founder who just laid off 100 people, lost their life savings, and watched their dream go bankrupt, hey, don't worry, your personal failure makes great ash for the next guy. Does Russo acknowledge the sheer human cost here, or is this purely a ruthless, sociopathic economic calculation?
That is the ultimate tension in the document. Russo isn't devoid of empathy, but he is pointing out that nature is devoid of sentimentality. The Finbows doesn't care about the feelings of the parent plant. And similarly, the macroeconomic market does not care about a founder's stress levels. It only cares about efficient capital allocation. If a business model is structurally flawed, keeping it alive artificially with cheap debt only delays the inevitable and harms a broader ecosystem by trapping engineering talent inside a zombie company. The fire is brutal, yes, but the fire is honest. Well, okay, the fire is honest. That leads us to the third strategy, which is the one that really gives me chills. The smoke readers.
This is perhaps the most incredible, almost magical biological mechanism in the entire document. Roughly half of the plant species in the Finbows do not respond to the intense physical heat of the fire at all. Their seeds are buried deep underground, totally dormant, doing absolutely nothing, sometimes for decades. They are waiting for one specific, highly complex chemical compound called carotenoid,
which is only created when plant matter burns. It's found in the smoke. Yes, it is a specific smoke compound. And these dormant seeds are so unimaginably sensitive that they will instantly trigger germination when exposed to carotenoid at concentrations of 1 part per billion. They are not reacting to the physical destruction of the heat on the surface. They're reacting purely to the chemical signal that a massive disruption has just occurred somewhere in the ecosystem, meaning the canopy is about to be cleared.
So what on earth is a smoke reader startup?
A smoke reader company is a startup that looks completely dormant to the outside world. They are not built to win under the current established market conditions. They are sitting on the sidelines, tinkering with strange, unproven technology, hoarding raw computing power, or building obscure cryptographic protocols. To a traditional spreadsheet-obsessed VC, they look like they are doing absolutely nothing of commercial value. They look like a waste of time.
But they are actually just waiting.
They are waiting for the faintest 1 part per billion signal of a massive global paradigm shift. Think about the engineers who were quietly tinkering with early neural networks and transformer models in 2016 when everyone else thought AI was a dead end. They were smoke readers. And when the signal finally hits, whether it's the sudden release of a new AI architecture, a geopolitical supply chain collapse, or a massive regulatory shift, they instantly germinate and take over the cleared landscape. They are the hardest companies in the world to fund because they look completely useless right up until the exact moment they become globally essential.
You have to be able to smell the smoke before you even see the fire. Which brings us, finally, to the sky. We've cleared the landscape with fire, we've analyzed the cooperative lions and the resilient hippos on the ground, but to truly synthesize this entire complex framework, Russo pulls our perspective all the way back to look at the namesake of the Akulla Reserve itself, the Varro's black eagle.
On his last morning in the car, Russo watches a pair of these massive eagles riding a thermal updraft high above the Rocky Valleys. They are effortlessly scanning 20 square kilometers of terrain from above. And this eagle represents the ultimate and perhaps most deceptively dangerous strategy of all: extreme, locked-in specialization.
Explain the diet of this specific eagle because it is hyper-focused to a degree that seems insane.
The Varro's black eagle eats the rock hyrax. That is essentially it. The rock hyrax is a small, free mammal that lives in the cliffs. In some regions, the rock hyrax makes up an astonishing 99% of the eagle's entire diet. It is widely considered the most diet-specialized large raptor on the entire planet.
And its body has literally mutated over millions of years just to catch this one specific tiny animal.
Yes. Evolution has engineered the eagle's feet to be 20% wider than a standard golden eagle's feet. Why? Specifically to grip the broad, awkward, flat back of a running rock hyrax. If you look at an ecological map of exactly where the eagle lives and overlay it with a map of exactly where the hyrax lives, they are perfectly identical. The predator and the prey have co-evolved into an unbreakable, perfectly calibrated biological lock.
But that lock is a trap.
It is the ultimate existential vulnerability. Because of that extreme, singular specialization, the eagle is entirely dependent on a single point of failure. When the Hyrax population experiences a natural dip, maybe due to a localized viral disease or a particularly dry season that kills their food source, the eagles do not pivot. They don't suddenly start hunting rabbits or snakes or birds. They simply stop attempting to breed entirely. Their entire reproductive cycle shuts down. They're completely bound to their niche.
And this is Russo's final devastating critique of the venture capital world and, honestly, of highly specialized corporate careers in general. The absolute best, most famous VC firms in the world often act exactly like the Varro's eagle. They develop an extraordinary, hyper-calibrated, highly lucrative niche. They build the perfect technical diligence teams specifically for Web3 crypto projects, or they have an unmatched elite founder network, specifically in enterprise software. Their entire fund structure, their brand, their hiring process, it is all purpose-built for that one exact thesis, just like the wide feet of the eagle are built purely for the Hyrax.
And for a decade, while that specific market is booming, they look like undisputed visionary geniuses. They circle high above the market, they see more terrain than anyone else, and they dive with absolute lethal precision.
Yeah.
But the niche dependency is real, and it is fragile. The fund that is perfectly calibrated for one specific technology wave will violently struggle when the macro wave inevitably shifts.
Because if you spent 10 years optimizing your entire firm to hunt crypto startups, and suddenly the global market exclusively demands massive AI infrastructure investments, your wide feet are completely useless.
The landscape changes, the prey disappears, and your historical success collapses because you forgot how to hunt anything else.
So if being the ultimate specialist eagle is a trap that leads to extinction, and if being an arrogant lone wolf lion is a statistical failure, and if being a flashy daytime hippo gets you killed by the market, what is the true lesson here? What is the ultimate takeaway from the Big Seven?
The true lesson is that you cannot afford to rigidly become just one animal. Survival is not an identity. It is a fluid state. It is about total situational awareness. It is the capacity to accurately, honestly read the terrain you are standing on in any given quarter, and then seamlessly shift your role to match the immediate demands of reality.
You have to know when the market is cold and scarce, and you need to swallow your pride and be the collaborative, egoless lion. You have to know when you need to be the deeply rooted risk router, just quietly surviving the economic fire while your competitors burn. And you have to know when to be the deceptively powerful hippo, building your internal armor and profitability in the dark, while everyone else is performing for the crowd on social media.
Exactly. Russo's week in the Karoo produced a profound, lived humility. It is the deep realization that the smartest, wealthiest, most educated people on Sand Hill Road are essentially just frantically rediscovering survival architectures that nature already perfected millions of years ago through the relentless, unforgiving filter of actual death.
Nature is the ultimate performance evaluator. It doesn't care about your pitch deck.
It doesn't. And that's why the literal dust from the Karoo scattered in Russo's notebooks is a feature of this document, not a bug. It strips away the pretense. It grounds the highly theoretical, abstract math of venture capital back in the dirt of physical reality.
This has been an absolutely incredible journey. We have covered the microscopic biological limits of the giraffe's heart, the invisible infrasound of the elephant matriarch, the democratic voting structures of the buffalo, and the literal regenerative ashes of the Fynbos fire. And I sincerely hope that you, listening to this right now, wherever you are, feel equipped with a powerful new lens, not just for analyzing venture capital or high finance, but for viewing your own career trajectory, your own personal risk tolerance, and the shifting ecosystem of your own industry.
Because the fundamental rules of survival are universal. They apply whether you're on the savannah or in a skyscraper.
They really are. And I want to leave you with one final thought, building on that incredible idea of the Fynbos fire. Look around your own industry right now, today. Think about the massive disruptions happening with AI integration, with the shifting economy, with global remote work. The fire is burning. So ask yourself, are you a resprouter with deep protective roots and irreplaceable skills that can survive the heat? Or are you a highly specialized eagle, perfectly adapted to a specific job title or a specific software tool that is about to completely disappear?
The landscape is changing.
It is, but more importantly, can you smell the carotenoid? What is the 1 part per billion smoke signal of disruption in your specific field right now that everyone else is ignoring because they're too busy staring at the shiny, obvious trends? Find the smoke. Because the canopy is about to clear and the next generation of giants is about to germinate. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon to unpack the next great stack of insights. But until then, remember that the pristine, predictable boardroom is an illusion. We are all still navigating the messy, primal realities of survival. Keep observing the real world.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.